Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Coffee Talk this morning. We are your hosts, Southborough Youth and Family Services. My name is Sarah Castle. I'm the Director of Southborough Youth and Family Services. And with me this morning, we have Megan Island, who's our Assistant Director. Good morning, Megan.
Morning.
We have Shannon Knyman, who's our Program Coordinator. Good morning, Shannon.
Morning.
And we have Lisa Avery Peck, who is our graduate clinician with us this year. Good morning, Lisa.
Good morning.
Thanks, everybody, for coming on. So we have a very important topic to cover today. So we're just going to go right into it. It's been a tough year for many. And as we head into the winter months where it gets colder and darker earlier, and also the holiday season is upon us, we thought it would be critical to cover the topic of suicide prevention. And I want to preface today's conversation by saying that this could be triggering for some people, and that it may not be suitable for younger audiences. And so you may want to use discretion in watching today's episode. I'd also like to emphasize that we are going to be covering some of this topic, but there's many things that we won't be talking about. And so you'll hear us say several times that we think it's really important for everyone to have additional training on suicide prevention. And this is not just a role for mental health professionals, but something that we all have the capacity to affect change. If we wait for mental health professionals alone to be able to recognize someone in our household, in our neighborhood, in our circles that might be struggling with suicidality, we may miss something. And so it's really critical that members of the community become comfortable with talking about suicide and to learn more about it, become comfortable talking about it, and that we really as a community need to decrease stigma around suicide because as we'll talk about in a few minutes, it's actually it affects everybody, and it's unfortunately a very common or an increasingly common issue for many families and individuals. So again, we're not going to be telling anybody on today's show how to treat someone who's experiencing suicide, but rather having an initial dialogue about it, dispelling some misinformation about suicide, giving you some important information of what to do, what not to do, and encourage you to explore other resources. I hope ladies, did I miss anything about what we want to preface our conversation about today?
No, I would just echo what you're saying, that it's a lot like you said, that this is something that I'm the one in this group who's not a clinician, that you want to look at it like CPR, that it's something that all of us can learn and save a life. And what we can do in this show in a short amount of time, we couldn't do a CPR training at this time. So in that same vein, we don't want to try to teach you that. So it's just like CPR, that you need that special training, but it's easy and it's quick to do. And we encourage you all to do it.
A great analogy, because if you think of someone choking, for example, the more people in that community who know how to help someone choking, the more likely that person is to survive that episode. Same thing with suicide prevention training. So,
Yeah, we figured that the best way to have this conversation was to get some questions from the community. And we figured that by collecting those and kind of answering those, that might be a good way for us to have this conversation. So I'm going to dive right in, and I'm going to read our first one that came to us. So somebody had asked, I don't know anyone who has committed suicide or attempted suicide, and yet I hear about it discussed as a big public health problem. How common is it, and who is affected by suicide? So Lisa, do you want to take a stab at that one?
Sure. So I'm so glad that one of our viewers has asked this question. And I'm glad that they asked it in the words that they used. Because one thing that's really, really important for all of us to think about when we're thinking about suicide and suicidality is really the way that we think about it and the words that we use when we describe suicide. And it helps us examine and think about, the language that we're using and become a little more sensitive about how we talk about it. And there are some underlying negative connotations that are still buried under the way that we use the language committing suicide. It almost sounds like the way we talk about crimes. And that's really not what most of us mean to convey when we're speaking of someone who's experiencing suicidality. So we're used to, it's just what we're used to. We're accustomed to hearing those words because that's kind of the way that we have historically talked about suicide. But even using those terms can sometimes stigmatize the feelings of people who are suicidal. And it can cause them not to seek the help that they need. So all of us, just as a beginning point, can think about what language we're using and how we think about suicide generally. And to get to the sort of more substantive part of the question, which is just such a great question, it is a really big public health crisis. And for example, according to the CDC, in 2018, suicide was the 10th leading cause of death overall in the United States. And it claimed the lives of more than 48,000 people. It was also the second leading cause of death among people who are between the ages of 10 and 34, and the fourth leading cause of death among individuals who are between the ages of 35 and 54. So that's a lot of people. And there are more than 2.5 times as many suicides in the United States as there are homicides. In 2018, there were 48,344 suicides, and there were 18,830 homicides. And I guess we're so much more accustomed to thinking that homicides are the huge problem because that's what we read about in the news or that's what we hear about on television. But really, suicidality and suicides are a big, big issue. Suicide is also the second leading cause of death. I guess I said this already, between people between the ages of 10 and 34. So I think it's also really important to recognize that people who are experiencing mental illness are not necessarily affected by suicidal thoughts. And not all people who attempt suicide or attempt to die by suicide have a mental illness. Oftentimes relationship problems and other kinds of stressors in people's lives, things like criminal or legal matters or persecution or racial tension or eviction or loss of income or sometimes the death of a loved one or even a devastating illness or a debilitating illness, trauma or sexual abuse or rejection, or a recent or impending crisis like a financial crisis are also associated with suicidal thoughts and attempts.
It makes me saddened to say, Lisa, that what you were just talking about, so many of those things that you listed are things that people are experiencing right now, either illness, loss of income, legal issues, so again, this suicide is a public health crisis anyway, and something we would be highlighting anyway. But in particular, this year, we're worried, and so again, all the more reason for us to be highlighting this. If you don't mind, can I just go back to the language piece? That all over the place, you're going to see, because as Lisa said, historically, we've used the term committed suicide. And the more politically, or the more sensitive way of saying that now is to say died by suicide. So we just really encourage you to move away from that language, away from committed suicide. Because if you think of, someone who passed away from cancer, we would never say this person committed cancer. And you can see the difference in the tone, that it's a, there's just that stigma, as you said, Lisa, that just looms. And so we need to show more empathy and sensitivity to people experiencing suicidality. So avoid the words committed suicide.
Yeah. Yep. Good point. If you don't mind, we'll maybe do another question. So someone else had written in and they had asked, I have absolutely no experience or background in mental health, but know that suicide is a really big issue. Is there something that I, as an average person, can do to help? So what do you think, Megan?
Yeah, so the short answer, yes. Sarah, I think, already touched on this at the beginning of the show and was talking about how, as a community, it is really important for as many people as possible to be trained in knowing the signs and symptoms of suicidality. And it's really important that as many people as possible should be trained in this, because it's not always going to be a mental health professional who's that first line of contact for someone who's having suicidal thoughts. It might be a friend, a parent, it might be a coach, a teacher, who is the one who is in touch with that individual who's having the suicidal thoughts. And the more people who are comfortable with being able to have that conversation with the individual about those suicidal thoughts, the less stigma there's going to be, and the more comfortable that people will be to reach out, to ask for help, to have that conversation. And like Sarah was saying, the more we can decrease the stigma, the more people are going to be able to reach out and ask for help when they need it. And so people might be saying, okay, so I can do something to help, but how can I help? What do I do? And that's where training comes into play. And so we highly suggest 2 different trainings that can be really helpful with learning about the signs and symptoms of suicidality. One is mental health first aid training, and the other is QPR, suicide prevention. So these 2 different types of trainings will equip you with what signs to look for, how to talk to someone who's suicidal, and what to do if someone is suicidal, and also what not to do. So before I talk about what those 2 other trainings are, I don't know if anyone wants to add a little bit about, anything about the importance of community, what the community can do, but if not, I'll dive in.
No, I think, again, people at home might be a little frustrated saying, well, can't you just do that now? Can't you just tell us what to look for? And, it's such an important topic that let this be a commercial of sorts for you all watching to say, please, please, please take this training. You might have seen opportunities for it before and said, that's for someone else. It doesn't affect me. Or I don't know anybody who's struggling that badly. You know, I don't think I actually can have some sort of impact. But again, I love the analogy of someone choking or doing CPR, because you don't know, you know, where you could be. You might be the only person around. You have no idea the impact you could have for someone who's struggling. So, so Megan, go ahead and talk about these two trainings, but at the end of this episode, you know, please know we're not going to go over all of those details. We're just really trying to encourage you all to take them, and we'll provide some more information about that.
So QPR stands for Question, Persuade, and Refer. So QPR is an organization that has a variety of different affordable and comprehensive online trainings, and some are as short as 1 hour, and they're self-paced. So the one that we recommend the most is the Gatekeeper training. And the key components covered in that training are how to question, persuade, and refer someone who may be suicidal, how to get help for yourself, how to learn more about preventing suicide, the common causes of suicidal behavior, warning signs of suicide, and how to get help for someone in crisis. So it kind of just covers the most important things to know for a suicidal crisis. Then the other...
Can I just chime in really quick too, because this past, was it spring, winter of 2019 into 2020, we had offered the community some QPR gatekeeper trainings. And so if anybody, I know we have some friends in the audience who may have actually taken one of those trainings. And word of mouth can be a really impactful and an impactful thing. So if you have taken, I'm really sorry, I'm going to turn this volume off. If you have taken the training and had a positive experience, or even if you have critical feedback, you know, if there's things that you still feel you're missing that you need additional support around, you wouldn't mind commenting on this video, because I think word of mouth saying, I took the training, it was excellent, or, you know, I learned this, that would be really helpful too. So, and then, sorry, I was just reminded of that.
Then the other one is mental health first aid, which is much more comprehensive. And so again, we're making the CPR reference. Just like CPR helps you learn what to do in a situation where someone's having a heart attack, mental health first aid can help you learn what to do when someone's having a variety of mental health crises. And so mental health first aid, like I said, is much more comprehensive. And so it helps you learn what to do in crisis and non-crisis situations related to mental health and substance abuse situations. It covers risk factors and warning signs for a variety of concerns, also strategies for how to help someone. And it used to be in person, now they're doing virtual online trainings. And it covers information not just for, like I was saying, crisis situations, but also it addresses a variety of diagnoses like ADHD, anxiety, depression, and gives you information about those kinds of things as well. And it's definitely a bigger time commitment, but it gives you a lot more information and not just what to do in crisis situations.
Right.
And what a great time to be learning right now that, you know, if we can do so many of these things virtually, that if you can do it on your own time, if you can do it, you know, after you're done with work and you put on sweatpants and, you know, it's just what a wonderful gift that you can give yourself and your community. Really nice way to give back.
I just want to add that we highlighted 2 different trainings. There are others out there too. Those are the 2 that we're most familiar with. And we're not suggesting you need to take both of them, but just wanted to highlight that you could do one or the other, and one's going to give you just the suicide prevention information, while the other one's as Megan said, much lengthier, but it's going to include a lot of additional information about mental health diagnoses and interventions.
Good stuff.
Yeah.
So another question that had come into us, someone had written, I am worried about someone in my life and I want to talk to him, but I'm afraid that by asking him if he is suicidal, I will make it worse. It will make it seem like I'm suggesting it or I'm encouraging it or will somehow offend him. What should I do?
So I think this is one of the biggest reasons why people avoid talking about suicide is they're afraid. They're afraid that somehow they're going to trigger something in someone else. It's a taboo subject. It's not something people are comfortable with. And so, the other thing that we see is people will be very concerned about someone and try to talk to them, but not quite get there. They might say something like, "Are you okay?" Or let's get together, let's spend some time together, sort of trying to reach that person, but without explicitly having the conversation. So listen, we totally understand how scary this topic can be and triggering, and especially if you're talking to a child of yours or someone you love very dearly, that you might not want to know the answer to your own question. But we just want, if you walk away with nothing else today, know that asking if someone is suicidal or if they're thinking of killing themselves or hurting themselves is not going to make it worse. In fact, it has the opposite effect. So if you can imagine being the person who's experiencing these very scary, isolating, hopeless feelings alone, and someone says to you, brings to light this very kind of secret thing or taboo thing that you're experiencing and says it out loud. Are you thinking of killing yourself? Are you thinking of hurting yourself? How much of a relief that could be to somebody to hear someone tell you, I feel comfortable having this conversation with you. I'm okay, to go there. To be, if we're being realistic, you may not be feeling confident having that conversation. You might be freaking out inside, and that's understandable. But above all, we want to make sure that you don't avoid asking the question or talking to the person that you're concerned about. And in fact, knowing, again, having that conversation, reaching out to a person, asking the question provides a lot of relief for somebody. I'll add that just because you asked once doesn't mean you can't ask again. You might not be happy or satisfied with what the person says. You might decide that you need to ask again, and that's totally fine. The part about offending your friend or your loved one, that makes sense too. Especially if it's somebody that you're not super close with, but you just see that they're struggling. But offending somebody is a much better scenario than losing someone to suicide. And so, we encourage you to take that risk and have that conversation regardless of the outcomes. Megan or anybody else want to chime in? I had other thoughts here too, but I have to remind myself of what else I was going to say. But that's, for me, the biggest piece to convey to people is to don't do nothing. Talk about it, and talk about it explicitly.
So another question that had come in, and it goes straight with what you're talking about, Sarah, is what if you ask that question and the answer is yes?
Right.
What then? What should I do?
I'm glad that question came, because I'm sure a lot of people are wondering about that. And I think that's another thing that people worry about and sometimes might keep people from asking, because that's also scary, is what do I do? Oh my gosh, this person said yes. So of course, you know, one of the most important things is don't leave that person, stay with that person, because it's important that they know you're there for them, and it's important to get them help. I think Sarah touched on this too, you know, convey calm, and even if it's hard, show that you can handle this. You might be really panicked inside, but as much as you can, show confidence and calmness outside, because if you show that person that you can handle this, they're going to feel confident in your ability to help them and support them. If you can't handle it, find someone who can. Whether that's, you know, making a phone call to someone, whether it's a mental health professional or someone else, you know, a trusted loved one who can support them, but find someone who can handle it, and then get that person professional help right away. So there's a couple different ways you could get them professional help. Call 911, psychiatric emergency services here in our area, that's through advocates. So the number for advocates, we'll put it in our comments later, but the number for psychiatric emergency services is 800-640-5432. And then there's also, of course, the National Suicide Prevention Hotline, which is 800-273-8255. So there's support when someone says yes, get them help.
Thank you.
And this will be a spot too where we reiterate the importance of these trainings that we keep referring to, that there's a lot, there's other things that can go into this conversation too. And it takes practice. In mental health first aid, you actually practice having this conversation in role play activities, because it just feels uncomfortable. And you have to get used to actually saying the words and the questions. So that's part of the training. But there's other questions that, you know, we encourage people to ask that have to do with, you know, imminent plans, you know, depending on the circumstances. Does anybody have means to carry out their plan in the immediate area? You know, how imminent is this? And we want to make sure that we're, you know, the professionals that we're bringing this person to have as much information as possible so that they can assess and keep this person safe. So that is something, you know, having the conversation, what to do in response to when a person says yes, what other information you might need to collect to, you know, sort of help assess the situation. All of those things are part of the training that you go through in both QPR and mental health first aid. But, you know, again, above all, if you walk away from this conversation knowing, keep that person safe. It's ideal if you appear calm. If you can't, you know, the most important thing is to stay with them and get help. So.
And Sarah, I think one of the things that helps the person who's helping somebody who's feeling suicidal stay calm is knowing that this is not all on them either. I mean, there are these other resources that they can reach out to. So it's not just on you or any one person. There are lots of resources out there. And the main thing is just to help the person get to the right resource.
That's right. I'll add too, for Southborough specifically, and for some other neighboring communities, the Southborough Police Department has a clinician on staff now to be able to help go out and assess for safety. So you might be thinking, call 911. I don't know if that's the right response. Actually, in a previous Coffee Talk episode, we had
yeah, Chief Paulus.
Chief Paulus and Sheena Mahoney
Yeah.
on. Sheena works for Advocates in the jail diversion program, but she's a clinician and works alongside the police department. And we talk in that episode about the difference between calling psychiatric emergency services and calling 911 and how the response might be slightly different. But when you're in an emergency, a psychiatric emergency, you do what's easiest and what's most available to you, and not now that's not the time to sort of evaluate which emergency service is best, because they actually communicate with one another and they'll help with that process. So. We have other questions?
I don't know that we did.
Oh, one additional thought that I had that I think, again, the trainings will address do's and don'ts. But a common thing that we hear from people a lot is saying they're doing it for attention. If somebody is expressing that they want to hurt themselves or thinking of killing themselves or talk about suicide, and we never want to ignore someone saying that. It's critical that we respond to it every time, regardless of the reason they say it. They're trying to get their needs met. So if someone is truly trying to get the attention of others by saying that, they're trying to get their needs met, and we need to respond to what those person's needs. We never want to send a message that the person needs to up the ante, because we're going to ignore that kind of a statement, because we get ourselves into a lot of trouble and we put that person's safety at risk when we do that. So just that's a big don't. So you want to take that seriously and respond to it every time. So again, we've said it several times today, but that we strongly encourage further training in these areas. Again, we hope this is our best sales pitch to you all to get further training, to recognize that you as a community member have an opportunity to help other people who are experiencing suicide, that it's a community issue. We all need to play a role in the solution and addressing this public health issue. And we strongly encourage you to take these trainings, to learn more about it so that you feel fully equipped. We're going to be sharing additional information in our comments and posts about some of the resources we shared. We absolutely want you to reach out to us if you have more questions about what we've talked about today. Again, we couldn't cover everything, but if anybody out there wants to take one of these trainings and is struggling with the ability to pay for it, let us know. We'll try to. It's such a priority. We'll try to make that happen somehow. So. So thank you all again, everybody here on the show today, but everybody watching too, for engaging in this important discussion. And next week is a holiday. We have Thanksgiving coming up next week, and it's going to be a hard holiday season, not what we typically experience. So again, we're going to try to shift gears like we did last holiday, and do a little bit more of an activity on Coffee Talk. We have Sabine St. Pierre. I don't know how many of you out there know Sabine. Sabine used to be a teacher at Neary Elementary School a while back. She is a chef, and she has her own catering company. Sabine, I hope I'm classifying that correctly, but Sabine's Cuisines is going to be joining us next week to do some cooking in the spirit of Thanksgiving. And Lisa, I'm reminded of you talking last week in our episode on coping strategies about how transformative smells and tastes and things like that can be. So we're hopeful that we can highlight ways that cooking can help us cope, can be a nice break, can be a grounding experience, and just to kind of switch gears a little bit in the spirit of the upcoming holidays. So thank you everybody for joining us, and we will see you next time.
Bye.